So I took this picture yesterday, and I'm very grateful to Ness for helping me get it into the PowerPoint. So what do we see here? We see a Murano figure of a blackamoor. Now, if you go to the souvenir shops that sell Italian glass, we see these depictions of diasporic people. And they're dressed in 18th century garb, and they're reminiscent, for example, of the lamp standards that one sees at a lot of luxury hotels, black bodies holding up lights, or in French material culture in the history of furniture, something called a guerdon, which was a low table, often with a crouching black figure holding a tray, so that the lord and lady of the house could put their aperitif on this subjugated and supplicating object. So here is a plastic planter box filled with Venetian beads being watched over by a glass blackamoor. And when I thought this captures so much about all the conversations for which I'm grateful that we've heard today. Thank you. Okay, good. Thank you, Carolin. And thank you, Royce.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. I think our kind of grouping on the panel allows us to have such a broad reach in prioritizing of knowledge and prioritizing of story. Where do we begin from? I always begin from who I am, who I was taught to, my responsibilities of who I speak for, who can't be here. And I love the pointing out that you have of what I think about are the nefarious undercurrents of if we follow those layers and those stories, like what can be almost the simplicity of this pendant. But if we follow those trade routes and we start to peel back those layers and kind of look at how the ceremonies of colonialism is to rename and to create remaking an image, a popular image of what should be rather than what it actually was. I think we can find that in art all across the world. With the pendants, my choice to highlight the makers first is taking back that space and that priority of the political duress that has happened with the acquisition, the theft of every single indigenous item. There is always that story, that undercurrent of what is happening. Around those same times, these pendants represent the first excursions into Central North America. These pendants and the trade routes, whether from the north or the south or the east, were all coming together with the culmination of land, of trying to find a route, and beads and trade goods were brought as a way to bribe, as a way to kind of sneak into a space by utilizing one of the most beautiful acts of Indigenous people, which is gifting and sharing and stories. And if we look back to kind of the beginnings of this work here in these beads, maybe they arrived, at the very beginning of the 17th or 18th century. We can't quite tell when these beads exactly arrived, but I do know that they were incredibly invested in a action and process of colonial ceremonial acts to rename and to retake and re-envision, and to create those sweeping landscapes, those portraits of the land, sans Indigenous people. It's also, though, the knowledge then we're equipped with to understand how we retake that knowledge, how we take it back, and to utilize those landscapes, those portraitures as evidence, as witness. These pendants are a witness to the fact that Lewis and Clark arrived and disease shortly followed. They also trained well after William Clark was named and, paid his way to be the first superintendent of Indian Affairs and opening the gates of St. Louis to the west. He trained George Catlin, who is known worldwide for his portraitures of indigenous people. But the undercurrents of the nefarious deeds is to paint us grotesque, is to paint us in anatomically incorrect proportions, to paint us in ways where the savagery could be a sideshow, an attraction. Also with the understanding that George Catlin then fostered in the support of many of the first treaties, and then the doing away with treaties and agreements. And then you see the same train of thought, people who then arrived, Maximilian de Wied, who came with Karl Bodmer, who was an incredible ethnologist who actually documented as he saw it. And knowing how to read and utilize that colonial work is so important, because then we can contrast the exact same images, the exact same villages, the exact same generations of people, and show what they actually look like versus the, quickly coming American mind and the images of the savage. So understanding the benefits of the work that you're doing and the work that I'm doing always comes in context. And prioritizing whose story is it, and in what way do we retell it, and in what way do we educate to understand the benefit of what can be taken as just very traumatic pieces of work, or we can use that trauma and empower ourselves as a form of witness. And that's what this pendant is. That's what those paintings are. That's what those landscapes are, is they're a form of witness that we become skilled in different ways to interpret and utilize to our benefits. Yeah. So that's kind of, Absolutely. Let's start with the other questions.
No, absolutely. So you say broad. I would also say it's really different. So when we stay with the object, the material, and how you speak about its agency, it's quite different. It's as if you travel some sort of into the opposite directions. So you, Royce, speak about the object as this potential. It always has the potential to be transformed, imbued by the maker. But as far as I understand, and also from our conversation yesterday, even if it's not imbued by the maker, it has the potential. So it is always there. And so this is something which is inherent in the object. And what you presented, Michael, is that the object is very much this signifier of this complicity, of genocidal violence and imperialism, and which counters denial, and which some sort of points towards something that lies outside of the object.
Yes, decidedly. I mean, I think objects, if we go back to Ruskin and anyone who writes about objects, they have power. They do have, there's the actuality of them, the fact that we use them. We might like the way they look. We might like the status that they bring to us. But the implication of things beyond the personal and the psychic has to be the social and the global. And therefore the question is how one gets to a narrative. Early narratives of divas, for example, talk about the beauty of those interiors and the well-being of the people. And yet, I would say that needs to be taken in the context of time. And now there's an opportunity for thinking beyond the object to the systems and structures that give rise to the object and give signification. What is the signification of the object in the passage of time? So thank you for that.
Can you maybe both speak about the relationship between the object and the human body?
Well, let's.
So if we keep within a narrow focus, because we could go all over with that, of the beads, the adornment, the regalia, the body becomes almost transcendent for items. It becomes a way and a method that breathes life and animates or reanimates items. And so when we use language to describe interacting and engaging with collections, with ancestral items or contemporary items, and we talk about they must be danced out. The human body and the human form and our actions allow us to express things for these items that maybe might not be in the vocabulary of people who don't know what it feels like or what it means to dance an item, to sing to an item, to meet an item. And I think that comes with perspective and context. So sometimes a knife is just a knife. Sometimes it really is. There is a function, there is a form to it, and the body used it as, in whatever way, a weapon. But sometimes it's not, and it was through humans or through, ancestors or spiritual beings, non-human. It's been animated in a way that it is a being now. And so the item itself is a being. It is a body. But it's perspective.
So I think cutlery is a fascinating thing in the Western context. If it's simply about function, I always tell my students we need something to cut, something to scoop, and something to stab. So knife, fork, spoon. But we know if you get invited to a fancy dinner, there might be lots of versions of those on the table. And the assumption would be that you know how to use them, and that there's a correspondence between what gets used and when and for what, as opposed to not knowing, in which case the people with whom you may be dining would have their assumptions about your lack of social grace confirmed. There's that, I don't think it's true, but it's a nice story that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen of Canada, was in Regina, Saskatchewan, and had lunch at a diner, and the waitress said, "Oh, keep your fork, Queen, there's pie." Now, if it's true, it would suggest that that person was simply interested in function. You need something for the pie. But for those people who would think, oh, to show off your sophistication, you need the best of the cutlery, and you need to have the manners, and you need to have the table, and you need to have the etiquette, and you have to all those things. So it goes to Carolin, your point about the body. Objects are, for the most part, prosthetic extensions in the Western conception of material culture. They aid us. They extend our reach physically and actually. And so therefore, if it's simply about function, scooping, stabbing, cutting, but it's not. It's about social elaboration and the performance of one's social and economic standing and cultural knowledge and sophistication in the context of a world that seeks always to judge, because material culture and the acquisition of goods vis-a-vis the hills was as much affirmational as aspirational. And I think in the context of Western materialism, aided by colonialism and capitalism, it was always about that. Can I pretend to be someone I'm not? Can I convince people that I'm better than I am? Can I fit into the world that I know I belong to because I'm worthy? And if it means having mahogany and tea and china cups and all of that, so be it. I deserve this.
I also asked the question, of course, in relation to Trinket, because I find it astonishing that we have this pavilion with the, I mean, you might know the amount, but with the thousands or millions. Yeah, so it's really the accumulation of this object. Yeah, millions of these beads are in this pavilion. So it's the accumulation of material. But it really is about what is beyond the material, which is the human body and the relation, the relation between the object and the human body, and then also amongst humans. And this is also how we experience the work, with our moving body in space and with the wind, activating these beats.
Yeah, I think that's one of the beautiful things of this symposium is there's a through line of the human presence. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the other presenters have touched upon that, the storying, storying our place, storying things into being. Going back to look at materiality and how that shifts and changes with the body or the human. When is a knife more than a knife? Well, what is the material? If I look back on, more based in the environment that I'm from, we have Knife River flint, which is one of the most prized materials across North America into, what is Mexico now and Central America. We have a huge trade route of this particular type of flint that now we call Knife River flint. And that's when a knife is more than just a knife. And we also have stories that are attached to it. And then we have whole societies that are attached to it. We have Metsiroga, the knife clan, that then gets, traditions and beliefs that make that knife more than a knife. And then that item puts a person in a place, meaning that they are reminded of where they are at this point in time, because at one time you only had flint knives. And so there's a tradition now amongst that clan with my people is you don't put a knife on a stove. And if you look at physically, at one time you wouldn't put a flint knife by the fire or heat it because it would burst. And so now over time, even when a regular knife, a metal knife that we use all the time, this particular group treat those items as imbued with knowledge and history, and it puts them in a place of respect and understanding. So going through collections, it is so incredibly important to know provenance and provenience, because that's when a knife is more than a knife. It's so much memory and length over time, but it takes that perspective to really know how to help educate about it, because I grapple with it all the time. As an Indigenous person, I should just know. We get treated that way. Well, you should just speak the language. You should just know kind of depths. You should just know about your indigeneity. But all of that is a point of teaching and mentorship that we're quickly losing. So knowing when is a knife more than a knife is a whole intergenerational relationship process of educating and being open to it as well. Yeah.
I mean, I think about objects always as mnemonic devices. We have things that we use, so the function is primary, but things are triggers to memory. And so, I'm always struck by sentimental movies where someone has died and then someone comes across a sweater or something, and there's usually the sweater's brought up and there's the flooding of the eyes and all, and you think, okay, so it may be the sweater, it may be the smell of the cologne or the perfume, etc., but the tangibility of the object takes a person into the realm of the intangible, into the deeply held memory of people, culture, place, and those types of things. If I move forward with that and I think about your work as a curator and my work as a curator and the work at Yale where I was interested in label writing and the question about how much information is too much information, and contemporary museum practice theory would say you can't have a label of more than 25 words. And people will say, because people won't read it. And someone at Yale told me that. And I said, I'm reminded of something that George W. Bush, a person I don't quote often, said, let's not give in to the soft bigotry of low expectations. And my attitude is, if you have to write a label that is filled with words to communicate vitally important information so that the object that's being looked at by people voluntarily is complete because to not provide enough information is a disservice to the goals of museology, the stewardship of objects to make cultures remembered. So, long-winded, but...
Yeah, we were talking about that last night because our title is aesthetics.
Yes.
For this panel, and we were like, okay, well, where is the aesthetics? Where do we loop it back? How do we get that? And you know that aesthetics are important. They bring out this curiosity, this they elicit this feeling, this humanness within us, and being able to put together an installation where the labels sometimes don't matter.
Sometimes they don't.
Yeah,
I mean,
sometimes, and we were talking, well, how do you tend to people who like labels and help share that story and the process and everything. And I think back to one of the works, that we just acquired at Yale by Marie Watt, who's a Seneca artist. She's also alumni of Yale. She's created these jingle clouds, amorphous beings, being around them without knowing the long history of the jingle dress and the movement that was started, the vision that came to utilize it, these, small tin snuff can lids that were wrapped and made into a jingle, and the chiming of all of those strung together bring healing. So much belief of that has now spread that dance across North America and across the globe. But she's created these jingle clouds that I've been able to witness and been part of activating, that you can feel people come in without any knowledge of the significance of what the jingle dress is, to come in and listen and just stop and pause and be in a space and feeling a space shifted because of what item is now placed in it. Mm-hmm. I think there's something very, very innate about the aesthetic of interjecting an item into a space. And I can't explain it all the way, but I do believe, and I know the power of that material. And I also know the power of the makers, the community, and the gatherings to create those pieces transcend place and time. And it reaches people without a label. And then that's the joy of being able to educate about, here's the community label, here's the chat label, here's a little bit more information about the significance of it. But you've already brought someone in because they can feel some type of pleasure and intimacy from the aesthetics of it.
And I so respect that example, and it's very moving and powerful. No. I understand that. I watched, standing outside the pavilion yesterday, all the people who had to touch the beads in front of Canada. Just people, their hands are running up and down them, and fantastic. They walk into the pavilion, and there's an awareness that you can't do that inside the space. You can look. I was also struck by the number of people, not our group, who didn't read Ms. Verna's text. Just went past it, and they took a circle around, they looked at things, and they left. And people were smiling and nodding, and so you think, okay, the aesthetic power of what Kapwani has created is real and palpable. I have no assumptions that people thought about Venice, about trade, about the exploitation of people, the commodification of bodies, a currency exchange for something produced here that might have been gendered and shipped around the world with vast, important consequence, important being good and not good. So then, as a curator and a historian, and my colleagues would know this, I almost want to stop people as they're leaving something, saying, hey, excuse me, just one moment. I noticed you were looking, but could we just have a quick a little midterm before you leave the installation? So your example about the jingle dress, I'm sure that there's a profound aesthetic experience for people who are in the presence of those objects and who hear the sound and the vibrations that would hit the body. Wonderful. But as a historian, I think, okay, it can't simply be aesthetic or synesthetic experience. Not that that's not wonderful. I get that. But I, in my life, long coming to a realization that white supremacy needs to be dismantled, that we can't keep exploitive capitalism going at the expense of people and ecological systems. And so there has to be the activist museum label, whether it's me talking to people, whether they're students, or posting 500 words next to a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Hill saying, don't be seduced by 18th century aristocratic style, because this was not be possible save for the spilling of blood. Yeah. And that's where I go.
Yeah. You know, absolutely. I agree that there has to be a public form of communication that is shifting
yes
labels. There also has to be an actual action.
Yes.
I know what speaks so much louder and what is felt so much more than what we can put in 60 words and 25 words is the impact of kinship and community when an actual institution invests in bridging that space of this is here to study, rather this is here to gather. This is created, this space is created. We are curating a space to bring people together. And I think that's, you know, artists and curators and installation teams and administration who value the benefit of kinship and community have been able to experience kinship and community in a way where they see that as the strongest change. Not just a label, but something that can elicit the feelings of this place actually cares. And the person and team curating this work and making this work, they know what it means and they actually care. And that doesn't mean that they're on the front lines, but it means they are part of a process. Because the loud, outspoken ones, there's also the ones who often get overlooked. They're the ones who are tending to the home. They're tending to the ones who need the heart. And that's hard to do and put into a label, and unless you have that experience.
You just wrote the most beautiful, powerful label with your words. That's what I would like.
And it's diversifying our teams, though. Not everyone, you know, don't have me come in and talk about math.
Right.
Like, don't set me up for failure and embarrassment. Knowing our teams and our strengths is such an important part of the curatorial practice.
Absolutely.
And it's also an important part of artists and drawing upon their resources, which I think this entire symposium has brought together so many people with a vision and a viewpoint and perspective, and you know, that we're all coming in and kind of balancing and vibing off of each other and figuring out, you know, in what way we fit along this beautiful journey that you've taken us on.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I think we've taken over.
This is wonderful. This is wonderful. I would like to come to the notion of consumption, because this is what you said yesterday, but you just referred to this or gestured towards this, that consumption exists also outside of the capitalist system. And I mean, you mentioned the shift of space and the shift of form, and I would like to bring in the notion of the shift of value, because I mean, this very much relates, of course, to Trinket, but it also relates to what you presented. So Kapwani told me that the beads originally were made to mimic precious stones. And then you shared with us that they were pulverized. So this preciousness was negated in this process and then imbued with a new subjectivity, which then is the precious. So there's a shift of value which happens alongside the shift of form, the shift of shape, basically. And maybe you can speak to this shift of value. And also then, Michael, you could speak, if you like, to, the notion of what you presented is we see this portrait and then this furniture gestures towards the social position of the portrait, the portrait in society, in a capitalist, imperialist, colonial society. So
the shift of value, I think with the work that I've been sharing, I don't think that the previous makers were disposing of value. They were engaging in a practice of making it their own, taking materials that had been harvested or acquired in various ways and adding value to it that was very specific to the people who made the request. So I don't think these pendants can be put into a category of blind consumerism. They weren't a commodity in the sense of mass production. They were materials acquired in quantities large enough that these particular type of seed beads could be remade easily. They were already small. They could be crushed and they could be remelted through various ways. I think if you shift that away from the crushing of the beads, the value then isn't necessarily the actual material on its own. It's the process. So then the value is the maker. The value is that you are able to go to this maker who in return is agreeing that you are a person who deserves this type of material. The same thing that we do with warrior shirts is there is always a conversation and a recognition of makers will not make a material for a person just because they ask. That is a value that someone brings in. They themselves, their body, their achievements is a value that then gets imbued into this pendant or imbued into a warrior shirt. So it's not necessarily a ridding of value, but an integration of it. Alchemy.
Yeah, absolutely. This is also what Kapwani is, the structure of alchemy that she's thinking of in Trinket. Like this shift of value, basically.
So value, value for objects tends to be determined by markets, collectors, sentimentality, and other related variables. I'm always struck that if you pay attention to the antique world, there's the idea that what's called brown furniture, mahogany, is no longer popular. And so be it. Young people want different things, perhaps, I don't know. But when I think about that in terms of the legacy of the enslavement of people and the mandates of the owners of those people to cut trees to satisfy people like the Hills, I don't want people necessarily to love mahogany furniture, although it might be attractive. It's certainly well made, very gifted craftspeople doing things. But I worry that the fluctuations of taste, the currency of things, will result in a loss of knowledge and a devaluation of the historical implications of things. I wanted to read, if I may, very quickly. Could you just put one more image up there? I didn't show this. If you go to my power, it's the Tiepolo. So There it is. I don't know how many of you know this image. It's Neptune bringing the gifts of the world to Venice. And there's, all of that stuff. So this Kapwani gave an interview to Art News, said the following: materials can be new documents or new archives, witnesses almost of past moments, to allow us to look at human history differently. And I'm profoundly grateful to you for making Trinket because of the conundrum that it poses, the seduction of its beauty, and the story that it invites people, should they be inclined, should they want to do the work, should they read Ms. Verda's thoughtful, critical text. What's possible? And, this panel, again, what an honor to be with you and you, Carolin, where we think about the aesthetics of things, how they make us feel. And then the fact that objects that are deemed to be beautiful might also have currency and cachet. And the pure Kantian embrace of things is suddenly undone by the crass commercial reality of transactions, which Marx talked about. So that's it.
You had to throw in Marx.
I had to throw it. Well, because we talked about Carl last night, and I thought he needs to be talked about all the time.
Marx wasn't a maker.
Yes, he was not a maker. He was not a maker.
He was a boards.
There we go.
I would open to questions unless you feel there's something that you really want to say.
Thank you. But happy to grab that.
Okay, so then we would like to open to you, and if in case you have any questions.
Or Aperol spritzes immediately to follow, right?
Okay, I actually have a question for Kapwani. The palm oil. So as organic material that's continuing to shift and change in that space, I thought it was extremely clever to have it be right there when you first walk in. Could you share a little bit about the palm oil?
Thank you for connecting with that in that way. It was really important, I think, that, I spoke about this at the very beginning with Gaetan, like trying to have movement in that space. And of course, the body brings movement. And I guess it could be read as a very clean exhibition, kind of exact in some ways. And there is this desire generally to work with porosity, to kind of break down, to have movement. So between inside and outside. And the palm oil is living of sorts. And try to really, bring this messiness, this organic bit in. And I think, we're talking about objects and them kind of being not activated or left, and they have to be in relationship, I guess. So with air, with heat, this palm oil is really, it's alive. And I love the fact that it overflows, that it spills, that it's continually like marbling in different ways. And it can, I guess, also almost be repulsive for some people. And I love that too, that it can, push that aesthetics of what is acceptable, what is the boundary of something. And it's just enough, I think. It's just enough to kind of to slightly add a bit of momentum or a bit of energy into that space. I hope that was the intention. It was really important to have that palm oil there. It wasn't the easiest but we got it in the end. So, and
I think it's interesting how thank you. I think it's interesting how it's complexifying the relationship of the gallery, the exhibition attendants, because if they turn off the heat, if they turn off the air conditioning, then the palm oil heats up and overflows. And then they come back and they send us images and they have to clean. So it's like a living object, which, I'm from afar going, oh, here goes the palm oil, But it's interesting because, again, it feels like it's alive. There's this, one could take it to the spirit level. It's constantly telling us nothing is just, you can't control everything. So there's that shift. And then the residue of that comes into the lines that you see within the inside of it. So it's It's really interesting. As the only living object that's, well, yeah, active one, right? Heat, cold, contracts, constant movement.
Thank you, Royce, for sharing song with us. Thank you, Royce and Michael, for sharing your research with us and for sharing the space and time with us. And thank you to all of you.